Hello, everyone. I am Sharona Whisler. I serve as the Executive Director for the Zionist Organization of America's Florida region. Welcome, welcome, and a special welcome to our local and national board members and donors who are with us today. And to my colleagues who are on this Zoom, a special thank you to my colleagues who are helping behind the scenes with today's call, Alan J., Director of Outreach and Engagement, Stuart Pavlak, Executive Director in Pittsburgh, Steve Feldman, Executive Director in Philadelphia, and our Communications Manager, Jackie Schaefer. I am so proud and honored to work with such a dedicated ZOA team, not just those who I mentioned, but everyone. Our crucial work in Israel activism, in combating against anti-Semitism, be it on college campuses, on Capitol Hill with our government relations department, and in the courts with our Center for Law and Justice. It has not ceased, and it's because of this incredible team we have here at ZOA. Please remain on mute during the program. We'll have a Q&A from the audience after the presentation, and you can submit a question by clicking the chat box at the bottom of your screen and type it in, and it will go just to the hosts. This evening's program is the Farhood, Roots of the Arab-Nazi Alliance in the Holocaust, featuring investigative journalist Edwin Black, who is the author of a best-selling book with the same title. Edwin is actually the award-winning and best-selling author of, I think, 11 books. Mr. Black's writing is translated into 20 languages in 190 countries, with more than 1.6 million books in print. His work focuses on human rights, genocide and hate, corporate criminality and corruption, government misconduct, academic fraud, philanthropy abuse, oil addiction, alternative energy, and historical investigation. On a personal note, I have really been blessed to work with Mr. Black many times, and please know this is just a brief summary of his accomplishments. You will see now that his breadth of knowledge and research speaks for itself. So please, Edwin, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Sharona. It's always a pleasure to work with you, and I've worked with you for years, and I know what a devoted worker you are for the community, for the Jewish community, for the pro-Israel community, and for Israel itself. I say hello to everyone. Thank you very much for attending this Zoom event. We're going to be speaking about the Farhood, Roots of the Arab-Nazi Alliance. And then I'll speak for about 25 minutes, and then I'll take any questions from the audience about this topic, or you may decide you want to ask me about any of my other best-selling investigations, such as IBM and the Holocaust, Financing the Flames, Nazi Nexus, Eugenics, etc. I should mention that I also now have the Edwin Black Show, which is the first Zoom TV show, and that's available at www.theedwinblackshow.com. We have our own YouTube channel, and we're live every Thursday by subscription only, that's every Thursday live. So now I'd like to deal with the Farhood itself, since we have limited time, and I could go on for 3 hours, but she's only given me 25 minutes. So the Farhood was a forgotten Arab Nazi pogrom. It took place on June 1st and June 2nd of 1941. And when I say it was Arab Nazi, I don't mean it was nasty Arab people doing nasty things. I mean, these were actual committed, devoted Nazis, some of whom had actually marched in the torchlight parades of the Hitler Youth and other NSDAP events in Nazi Germany. They were closely aligned with Hitler's greatest with Hitler's greatest Arab ally, which was the Mufti of Jerusalem, Hajj Amin al-Hussein. Now, let me give you a little bit of a background as to why this is important and where it all leads. It isn't just that we have a terrible pogrom. There are terrible pogroms throughout Jewish history, throughout Jewish lands. Um, uh, if you go into Google and type Jewish expulsion from, there's a long list of cities that you can choose from. But the Farhood was the beginning of the end of 2,700 years of Jewish existence in Iraq, peaceable existence, loyal existence. They were there 1,000 years before Muhammad. And as a result of the close alliance between the Arabs and the Nazis, and the centrality of that alliance as it took place in Iraq due to the oil wealth, which the British controlled but the Nazis wanted, that pogrom was the beginning of the end for the 2,700-year Jewish existence of the in Iraq, and it led to the expulsion of the Jews, stateless, penniless, all of their possessions forfeited, and it was an important part of the 850,000 person Jewish expulsion in the 50s that I call Yom HaGirush. The Farhood was forgotten as a Holocaust event, and one of the reasons it was forgotten was because the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C. didn't want to deal with it. Now, why didn't they want to deal with it? Remembering the this pogrom in which hundreds of Jews were killed, hundreds of businesses were burned, looted, many people were raped as a result of this, but the Holocaust Museum didn't want to deal with it because it violated their mission statement. Now, why did it violate their mission statement? Because the mission of the Holocaust Museum was to preserve the memory of the Holocaust of European Jews. So right off the bat, that excludes all the Jews in North Africa, all the Jews in Iraq, all the Jews in the Levant, many parts of Europe which were actually close to the Levant, and as a result, no one really knew about it. I wrote a book called Banking on Baghdad, and Banking on Baghdad told the 7,000-year history of Iraq, and I noticed that there was this forgotten pogrom. And then so many people were amazed because the European community had no idea what it was, and every Sephardic family knew what it was, and the Sephardic people could not understand why their history, their Kristallnacht, had been excluded from collective memory. There started the Farhood Recognition Project. People everywhere were starting to talk about it. I then wrote a full book on it, the Farhood, Roots of the Arab-Nazi Alliance. It's, as I say, it's available at any Barnes & Noble and Amazon and wherever the best books are sold. And then it was my determination that we should recognize this day, June 1st and June 2nd, as International Farhood Day. And I organized that, and International Farhood Day was declared and proclaimed by me in a live global event at the United Nations in 2015 with some of my friends, Malcolm Hoenlein, Aliza Lewin, some people from Stand With Us, but also Rabbi Abadi and many others who are deeply involved in the community. And since then, it's been recognized around the world. The Foreign Ministry recognizes it. Many other groups recognize it. They observe it. It's now part of the parlance. What's important is not that it was just a pogrom, but it led to the forgotten expulsion, not so forgotten now, of 850,000 Jews who were kicked out penniless. So what's the background to how all of this occurred? And by the way, in case anybody out there like Edie Gershman or Laura Ashkenazi wants to know if I'm a descendant of Iraqi Jews, the answer is no, I'm not. I'm a descendant of Polish Jews, and my mom escaped from a boxcar on the way to Treblinka, was buried in a mass grave. My father was a partisan and found her, and they lived for 2 years in the woods. But I have not narrowed my view on the Jewish people, whether they're from Ashkenazic background or Sephardic or Mizrahi. Any misery inflicted upon the Jews is my personal misery. So we have the Jewish community, and they're in Iraq for 2,700 years. But the fate of the Jewish community is decided not by what's going on in Iraq, but what's going on in Jewish Palestine. Why? Because, as you know, after World War I, a number of nations were invented out of whole cloth by the League of Nations. There was Lebanon, there was Syria, there was Iraq, there was modern Hijaz, there was modern Egypt, and then, of course, there was Jewish Palestine, and eventually Jewish Palestine was bifurcated. That's a funny word to use. Bifurcated, it means cut in half, but in this half, the Arabs got 73% and the Jews got a third, and they made yet another country called Transjordan. All of these countries were designed for nationalism of the group. All but one were Arab national states, and one was a Jewish national state. Well, this was completely unacceptable to the Arabs there, who, even though they had all these 5 states, did not want the presence of the Jews being elevated to sovereignty. Not in the full of Jewish Palestine, which was reduced by 2/3 to create the nation of Transjordan. And by the way, the memo that created Transjordan, by Winston Churchill, I sometimes like to talk about Memo Day. That would be their Independence Day. They got their memo from Winston Churchill declaring that they were a nation. But the forces against the Jews would not tolerate Jewish existence in Jewish Palestine, and this went back to the concept of dhimmitud. Dhimmi, for those who don't know it, it's D-H-I-M-M-I. I'm sure many of our colleagues do. But to be a dhimmi is to be a second-class citizen within the Arab realm, within the Islamic realm. And the Jews were dhimmis, and so were the Christians and other groups. And they were not permitted to observe their religion, were not permitted to build new religious edifices, and could only exercise their activity with the permission of the ruling Arabs and or Muslims. Let's say Arabs and Muslims now, because we're mainly concerned with the Middle East. And the Jews also, in many cases, had to wear special colored clothing, special hats. In some cases, they had to wear a star. They had to ride a mule instead of a horse. And the only way they could function with any amount of independence was to pay a special protection protection tax. And this tax had to be paid not with a check, but in a manner of submission, where they got a clap on the cup and they had to bow and pay the zakat, and then there would be a protected class to show that they were there only as long as they were tolerated. Now, this should not make you think that everywhere in every Arab country, since the Arabs took over the Middle East as a result of the Islamic conquest of the 7th century, It should not mean that Jews were persecuted in all of these lands. In some lands, they were exalted and treated fairly, respected, and allowed to thrive during certain periods. In other lands, they were persecuted, they were lynched, they were forced to convert to Islam or to become crypto Jews. So it just depends, to avoid generalities, on the region, the dynasty, and the era, on whether Jews were persecuted, tolerated, or exalted. But whether they were tolerated or persecuted, it was with the consent of the ruling Arabs and Muslims of the day in the area. And the concept of sovereignty, of self-governance, totally undercut that authority, and that would not be permitted. So once the Jews started to return to their ancient land and coalesce with the Jews who had already been there for many centuries and combined to make strong communities with an urge toward sovereignty, the Arabs more and more turned to violence against the Jews. And the violence was every day. It would sometimes, a guy would step out of an alleyway or a doorway and knife a Jew and disappear into the crowd. And there seemed to be a denouement of a kind when the Jews wanted to go to the Wailing Wall, to the Kotel, and sit down. They said it's hot. It's 100 degrees like we have now in the country. We want to sit down when we pray. After all, this is our country. We're designated by the League of Nations by 54 countries. Even Germany, which lost the war, and Turkey, which lost the war, have agreed that we'll have Jewish Palestine. The Jewish sovereignty will be restored from where it was stolen. And we want to be able to sit at our own wall. And that violated the Sharia, which said that Jews may not sit at the Wailing Wall. Now, the Wailing Wall was already being trashed. It was being used for animals. It was, in some cases, used as a latrine. Noise was made to disrupt the Jews there. But when the Jews wanted to sit, from the point of view of those who led the hate-filled community, such as Hajj Amin al-Husseini, that was the first step along the way toward claiming the Wailing Wall. That could not be done because the Wailing Wall was also what you and I call the Kotel, was also known as Al-Barak. And Al-Barak was so named for Muhammad's white-winged horse. As you may remember, Muhammad went to the seventh heaven, and when he went to the seventh heaven, he visited the furthest mosque. And the furthest mosque was thought to be the mosque with the least amount of people, and the word furthest in Arabic is Al-Aqsa. So he said, I'm going to go to Al-Aqsa Mosque. He tethered his white-winged horse at what we know as the Wailing Wall, ascended to the seventh heaven, and that makes that not the Jewish Kotel from the temple. That makes, from the Solomonic period, that makes this Muslim property. So they said, we will not permit it. And the cops, the constables, the British constables said, don't sit there. But they did sit there. And the Mufti and the hate-filled group that the Mufti led said, don't do that again. But they did do it once more. And on that day, in the late 20s, the Jews did sit, and unleashed against them was a mob of violence. And Hajj Amin al-Husseini was always talking in one tone, in British, and in English to the foreign community, and in saying, I want peace, I want stability. And in Arabic to his own people, he was saying, kill the Jews, they're raping your women, they're stealing our edifices, they're invading the temple, etc., etc. So he goes to the cops, Hajj Amin al-Husseini, and he says, quick, get yourself down to the old city because there's violence, they're knifing the Jews, they're doing things of that nature. The cops all deployed to the old city to straighten things out. While the cops have been deflected to the old city, the main band of marauders goes up to Hebron and commits a dastardly pogrom against the defenseless Jews of Hebron. And it wasn't just a massacre, it was a massacre perpetrated by method according to the individual identity of the Jews involved. And so the banker in Hebron had his stomach cut open and his bank receipts were put in his belly and burned. The baker had his head baked in his own oven. A Christian woman who was visiting was nailed like on a cross to a door. And it was some of the greatest violence that has been perpetrated in that area. It only stopped because righteous Muslims intervened and stopped their neighbors from even greater heinous events. The British came in. Eventually, they tried to arrest the Mufti. The Mufti escaped dressed as a woman. That's how they always escape, dressed as a woman, and escaped to Iraq, where he made an alliance with a fascistic group called the Golden Carpet. And the Golden Carpet wanted to get rid of the British, and they wanted to align with Germany. And so they tried to destroy the British base. The Golden Square was the name of this group. They tried to destroy the British base in Habaniya and turn over the oil to the Germans, because of course the Germans could not go ahead with Operation Barbarossa and invade and invade Russia without oil from Iraq. That was an unsuccessful attempt. In dejection, they returned to their barracks, they returned to their homes. At the same time, they set upon the Jewish community, which was observing Simchas Torah. And from that moment, a horrible 2-day pogrom overshadowing the Kristallnacht in some people's eyes was perpetrated. Babies were cut in half in front of their parents and thrown into the river. Girls were raped in front of their parents. Mothers were killed in front of their daughters. Fathers were killed in front of their sons. There were girls taken off to a kind of a rape camp in a bus. Even into the hospitals, they invaded and tried to kill the Jewish patients in the hospitals. And it was 2 days before order was restored. And finally, it was restored. And that was called the Farhood, which in a Kurdish dialect means violent dispossession. So we forgot it, but they never forgot it, because the Nazis under Himmler continued to observe the anniversary of the Farhood in Berlin, when Hajj Amin al-Husseini was a colleague and a guest of Adolf Hitler personally. You've all seen the pictures. In fact, this is the book, The Farhood, and this is the famous picture of Hitler and Husseini having their secret meeting, which was not secret. It was covered in the newsreels. Everybody has the protocol. I don't want it to seem that all the Arabs were this way. There were other members of the Arab community who were like the Hashishimi family and other families. that wanted to live in peace with the Jews. They loved it because they got lots of money for their little parcels of land, maybe 5 times as much money for their parcels of land. But those who wanted to coexist with the Jews were always shouted down, shot down, and put down. And it was the forces of Haj Amin al-Husseini and the Nazi allies who ruled the day. That began the beginning of the end. And when Israel was finally declared in 1948, the Arabs, through the Arab office, with the assistance of the KGB, set forth a seemingly unified set of regulations that were applied by each country, fill in the blank. It implemented the Eichmann program, which was the same program that IBM had perfected in Nazi Europe: identification, expulsion, confiscation, ghettoization, and deportation, and even extermination is what IBM did. This was truncated in the Arab countries, the entire Arab Crescent, all of North Africa, and the Jews were to be expelled, penniless. It was publicized in the New York Times. It was known everywhere, and that's exactly what happened. The Jews were gathered up on a single day. They had to register all of their goods, all of their possessions. The rings were torn from their ears. The scarves were torn from their necks. Their bracelets were ripped from their arms, and they were sent out to the airports. And if there was not an airlift day and night to rescue these Jews and to bring them to Israel, then the promise was they would be sent into the desert and dealt with, as it was done before. There were at least 2,000 Nazi escapees, members of the SS, Gestapo, concentration camp guards who had escaped Nuremberg, and Nuremberg justice went out through the Rat Line, Odessa, and others to reestablish themselves in the Arab hierarchy, in the Arab military and security services, and in so doing, help establish the modern Middle East that we know today. I've actually spoken to some of the pilots who flew day and night to get these Jews into Israel, and most people don't know that the name of the airline that flew the Jews day and night was Alaska Airlines. So that's what happened. And the Jewish communities in the Arab countries were reduced by some 99% in most areas. I know that it was down to single, double, triple digits in certain countries. I think in Iraq there may be 11 left, there may be 6 left. It's debated because many of them are crypto. The matter was all forgotten, and but I did not forget, and now I've told you, so you don't have to forget. Thank you very much. Now I'll take questions.
Okay, Edwin, thank you so much for that presentation. I don't think I'm exaggerating when I say that you've enlightened millions of people, whether they've read your book or not, but it's brought attention to this horrific time in our Jewish history that hasn't gotten the attention that it deserves and the memorial that it deserves. And so I'm going to, so I want to thank you for that. It wasn't taught the way that the Holocaust was taught in my day school upbringing. So I've learned so much from you, and so thank you for teaching me and for all of us here and through all of your writing about the subject.
Thank you very much for those words.
I'm going to remind everybody that you can ask a question by typing in on the bottom of your screen. You'll see a chat, and you can type in questions that will go to the hosts. But while we're waiting for the questions to populate, I'm going to start with the question that goes back to my comment about really not having this information in my day school Jewish education, why it's so largely forgotten about, and also really not so much discussed, even by Jews from these Middle Eastern countries. And then a follow-up question to that is the Jews that remained, my understanding is that they experienced the similar betrayal to Jews in Eastern Europe, betrayed by their neighbors and friends, where our history or Jewish history in the Middle East goes further back, thousands of years. And if you can, talk more on that.
All right. Well, first, the main reason it was forgotten was because the legacy of the Holocaust, of the Jewish torment was mainly in the custody of Europeans. I should also mention that as a result of 850,000 Jews, which largely were transferred into Eretz Yisrael, this fake allegation that the Jews in Israel are from Miami and from Montreal and from Munich and all these other places, that's false. Roughly half the families in Israel, and I think all the people on this board are aware of that, have Sephardic roots. Half the power in Israel, some would say more, is in the hands of the Sephardic community. And this is an important fact that those who hate Israel want to ignore. And it's a counterweight to the issue of how many refugees arose from the conflict of the War of Independence. The difference is that millions and millions of dollars, in addition to legacy and state, were forfeited. The Jews got nothing. Every effort to get those documents, every effort to file those lawsuits was thwarted. Now, no effort was made by the organized collective memory community to deal with this issue. And once they had gone 50 years without dealing with the issue, it became hard for them to admit, oh, we forgot all these hundreds of thousands of victims. So they figured, look, we didn't bake this bread, now the bread doesn't exist, no matter how you slice it. So the Holocaust Museum and other groups worked very hard to stop people from bringing this up to the point where there were protests, there were angry groups, and finally, after many years, plus it was political, because there were various peace efforts underway, most of them half-hearted, and it was thought that, well, this is going to obstruct the peace process, or it's going to embarrass the Arabs for killing the Jews, and all of that is false. I remember when I went to research my book, Financing the Flames, and they would say to us, well, you see, what do the Arabs have to do with the Holocaust? Look, they came in and they took our property because of the Holocaust. What do we have to do? And I had to tell them, that is when I wasn't undercover. I had to tell them, you were full partners with the Nazis. Not only were you partner in mind and deed, there were 3 divisions of Waffen-SS. A division is not quite 10,000 people. You had the Kammer, the Handschar, and the Skanderbeg operating throughout Europe, doing anything that a military would do. Hajj Amin al-Husseini was active in the concentration camps. He was active in in urging the European countries not to save children, but to, quote, send them to Poland where they can be controlled. He knew what that was. The fact that there was an Auschwitz killing Jews was not a secret, like some people would like us to believe. The AFL-CIO was giving out pamphlets about it. Was giving out pamphlets about that. It was no secret. It was no secret. It's comfortable now to say, "Oh my God, we didn't know. We just came upon the gate and look what we found." They knew. They didn't want to know. It's a whole nother body of knowledge, which I'm working on for a separate book, of my many separate books. So there was a huge active effort by the Holocaust Museum and its allies to not remember what they had forgotten to remember, not change the mission statement. It became very, very impossible. It took somebody with chutzpah to stand up and do what I did, and I did do it. And they had all the historians and everything that bought and paid for his historians. Eventually, we made nice, but they were the main ones trying to keep it down. Then they finally recognized it. They recognized the Farhood. It was hard to not recognize the Farhood, but those who struggled to preserve the memory of the Farhood before me were the Justice for Jews from Arab Countries. This is an organization. I know Mort was active in this. Malcolm Hohenlein from the Conference of Presidents, who will not be successfully replaced by anyone because he's irreplaceable. So Malcolm, if you're listening, I said it again. So we finally got the word out. Now it's commonplace. Every June 1st, people are saying, well, let's remember the Farhood. Sometimes I'm mentioned, sometimes I'm not. But when you're an author and you excavate a piece of history, it's like hatching taking an embryo and seeing it grow up and fly away. So it becomes public property. That's a great that's a great compliment. So next question.
All right, we have a question going back to what when you were describing the violence and the attacks that the Jews were experiencing in these Muslim countries, and not just Jews, but also Christians. And thank God the Jews, in large part, were able to. They were kicked out. So the Christians that stayed there, we still hear about the persecution and the attacks that they're experiencing. So was this stemmed from there? And was there any reprieve for the Christians in Middle Eastern countries?
Well, the Christians are stuck there in many ways, but the Christian community in Iraq and throughout the Arab world has been progressively, they have significantly replaced the Jews as the most persecuted group, religious group within that area. The Baha'is are decimated. The Jews have been fully expelled. The few sheltered Jews that they have now are just token dhimmi protectees. Many of them have of the ones there have become crypto Jews. You asked a question before that I didn't fully address. You said, what happened to the Jews who stayed? Not all the Jews could go. Well, the Jews who stayed were more and more discriminated against until it became difficult, not impossible, but difficult for them to express their Jewishness. But every time they wrote something in Hebrew, every time they had a Hebrew book in the synagogue, it was a potential crime of espionage because it's written in the language of the Jews, in the language of the Zionists. So it was a very frightful a very frightful existence. So you are correct. Christians are now still there. In many cases, their religious history is there, and they are daily under threat. They're daily raped. They're daily persecuted. Their churches are bombed. We know the stories, but it's not enough to know the stories. We need to know what's going on. And it's not enough to be complacent and say, by the way. So go ahead. What's your next question?
Right, and the world is largely silent to that.
The
Okay,
world is largely silent, and the world has been largely silent. So just remember this. The world was silent with the Armenians, and you see what happened. Go ahead.
we have a request to discuss the role, if you could kindly discuss the role of Hajj Amin al-Husseini and the Mutahana Club in carrying out the Farhood.
What was the second person?
The Mutahana Club.
Okay. Well, the Hajj Amin al-Husseini was the central figure because he led a giant clan, and he was well funded. He was on the British payroll, and he remained on the British payroll. You know, he didn't win the election to be Mufti of Jerusalem. It was the British who steered the inconclusive election toward his side because they thought that he would protect their interests, which was oil in the Middle East. They didn't care what would take place with the minorities. So not only did the British designate this guy as the Mufti, they actually gave him a new title, the Grand Mufti, to make him even muftier, so that he would be on their payroll and do their bidding. He had his own autonomy going on. He had his own schools, his own budget. He had his own administrative apparatus. It was almost self-government. He made these alliances with the Nazis. He started a worldwide pro-Nazi Islamic and Arab movement. It was he who got the Dome of the Rock to go from a dilapidated obscurity to a cause celeb. And the Mufti of Jerusalem was one of the greatest liars in the history of war crimes. He had a fascinating ability to speak in a lofty way in English, but when he was writing in his own language and speaking to his own coterie, he would be ruthless. Remember, it was the Mufti of Jerusalem who described Eichmann in his own diary, Eichmann as a diamond. So the Mufti of Jerusalem is the central figure. It was the Mufti of Jerusalem who, under Himmler's baton, raised 3 armies in the Balkans, but they also worked from Paris all the way to the Urals. And as I said, they did everything that an army would do. They were infantrymen, they were artillery guys. These 3 divisions, not units, divisions of the Waffen SS, artillery, sabotage, paratrooper, just everything that a modern military would do. The Arabs were doing. They had special dispensation to do their prayers. Everybody's seen the pictures of 1,000 Muslims bowing. You just go to Google, go to images, type Arab-Nazi alliance. You'll see all those pictures. And it was the Mufti and his circle, other people, who convinced the German Foreign Ministry to send their own version of Lawrence of Arabia into Iraq. His name was Groba, Grobba. He was an instigator. He was a provocator. Most people don't know. You can find Groba in many books, but almost no one knows where Groba got his name. His name was A. Borg, and A. Borg backwards was Groba. And they had Radio Berlin in Iraq spewing horrible information. The marketplace was filled with posters on earth, in heaven, Allah is your master. On earth, it's Adolf Hitler. In addition, the Hitler love cult. The Hitler love cult was permeated throughout the Arab world, where they had invented this little fairy tale about Adolf Hitler. Oh, we love you, Adolf Hitler. Your real name is Muhammad Hadar, raised as a little Arab boy, went to all the mosques in the Arab lands, and then grew up to become Adolf Hitler. One of the leading writers of the Love Letter to Hitler contest that was done each year was written by a guy called Anwar Sadat. So, but what does that mean? It means, I know, Edwin Black, black shirt, black business card, everything is black, black, black. But the fact of the matter is, there actually is hope, because if Anwar Sadat, after writing a love letter to Hitler, can make some semblance of peace with Israel, that's an important thing. Now, your next question is, well, when you say peace, what do you mean? I don't say peace with a large P. I don't even mean peace. There will be no peace with Arabs in your lifetime or the lifetime of your kids, maybe even the descendants of your kids. But there will be an opportunity, and there can be an opportunity, for peaceful coexistence. Peaceful coexistence, which means the absence of war. What do we have now with Jordan? And what do we have now with Egypt? We don't really have peace, but let's say we have peaceful coexistence. There's a piece of paper. Maybe after a couple of generations, we would then actually go from peaceful coexistence to a true peace. And maybe a few generations after that, there might be a true fraternity amongst the Semites. But that remains to be seen. And there will be no progress in the Middle East until people understand what the history is. And we will never go forward to make peace unless we can unmask the true events as they happened. And this book and my efforts are an attempt to do that.
Thank you again for that. Here's a question. Did the Iraqi officials know where these Jews were going on the airlines? And then just another question about Alaska Airlines, because I have a few from our guests. Someone asking about it being Alaska Airlines being a front for CIA operations, and why Alaska Airlines got involved.
Wow, that's pretty interesting. All right. Well, what was the first part of that multi-part question?
Okay. So did the Iraqi officials know where the
They knew everything, because every passenger, every flight, every itinerary had to be approved in advance. It was not a secret airlift. The hierarchy of the children of the hierarchy, the sons and daughters, at least the sons and grandsons, they had to, they were getting bakshish, they were getting payments. So it was all clear that this was going on. And they wanted the Jews to go to Jewish Palestine because they wanted them, Sharona. They wanted them to go there. And this is interesting because they thought that the influx of 850,000 Jews all at once would create a demographic bomb and Israel would never survive. But Israel did not keep them on the beach. Israel did not put them in internment camps like the Arabs have done to those who since 1967 decide to call themselves Palestinians. You may say, wow, I go to Ramallah and it's a capital and there's refugee camps there. Why is there a refugee camp in Ramallah? Walk outside, go to the Starbucks across the street and get a cup of coffee. So the Jews did not do that. They quickly absorbed they quickly absorbed these Jews. They did have camps, tent camps for a very brief period of time because they had to, but in no time at all, the Jews were integrated, they were dispersed, they were put in various towns, and they were ultimately, a generation later, given great powers to share power in the state. So that was the first part of your question. What's your second part?
About the Alaska Airlines and their involvement. Why was there a CIA connection? I hadn't heard that, so I don't know if you have knowledge of that. But there were some questions about the airline and their involvement.
Yeah, they were. There was no CIA. They were not a CIA for the. They were not a front for the CIA. You got the wrong organization. And their name at that time was not quite Alaska. They had a special charter group, which had a name closer to Middle East Airlines, but they were the only ones willing to charter the planes and take the risk. And so even that was forgotten until several years ago. Now it's proudly displayed. But at the time that I did my book, when did I do my book? I did it 10 years ago. No one was talking about this 10 years ago. No one was talking about this even 6 years ago, 5 years ago. So at that time, I called Alaska. I told them, look what you've got. And they said, yeah, we know about it. I said, go make a page, go make a museum. And they've done that. And now it's open. But they weren't a front for the CIA because the CIA did not exist at that time. It was actually for the Mossad, if the Mossad still exists. Does it still exist, Sharona? Is there still something called the Mossad?
I can't answer that question.
Okay. Give me another question.
Okay. I'm hoping we have time for two more. We definitely have time for one more. So this is from.
It's okay. You could make it two if I could have a little more.
Okay. So this is a question from one of our national board members, Kathy Gould.
Who was the board member?
Kathy Gould.
Kathy Gould. All right, Kathy.
With a T. Okay, so Ms. Gould's question is, how did the British respond when the Mufti joined the Nazis?
Well, the British didn't know what to do. They had a hard time responding to anything. You have to understand. The British barely had the oil to fuel one aircraft at Habaniya to take on the German fighters and bombers. Actually, the Mufti and the Iraqi forces were so aligned with the Nazis that the Nazis sent over one of their #1 bomber pilots to bomb the British facilities. And the Arabs were so happy to see him, they shot him down with all the celebratory rifle fire, so he never made it. But the British were always in the position of trying to avoid the pendulum, the axe on the pendulum, whether it was the oil that they needed, that they wanted to control, whether it was the Arabs, whether it was the Jews, their obligations under the League of Nations, their obligations under the United Nations, which was replacing the League of Nations. Remember, they had an empire that went around the world. And so there were Arabs and Muslims in India and in London who were rallied by the Mufti of Jerusalem. So it was very hard for the British to take any actions. When the Farhood occurred, they knew everything that was going on. They were just 8 miles away. They had their spies, they had their reports. I've got copies of the original reports, which were published in 5 different editions as they continued to take out different things. And finally, the Sukhnut, the Jewish agency, entered the scene and said the Jews are being killed. No one will know exactly how many Jews were massacred because there was a commission afterwards. Jews were afraid to go forward to the commission. It's considered to be several dozen, and I think, and I and other observers who know believe the true number is several hundred. But the story is the same in every family. The homes were marked in Iraq with a dalit, with a khamsa upside down, generally in red. When the Arabs came during the riot, they would try to break the door down. The Jews would push the furniture up against the wall. They would break in. The Jews would race up to the rooftops. They would the Arabs would try to kill them. They would leave various valuables in their wake, so the Arabs would be slowed down picking them up. They would jump from rooftop to rooftop. When they ran out of rooftops, they took their kids and they dropped them down to the ground for somebody to catch them in a blanket. This story is known by every family. Next.
Edwin, thank you so much again. We're really almost at our ending time, and I think we're gonna have to have you back at some point and have you again and again to really share more about this and your other research that you've done. That really, there's no one else doing what you're doing. So I thank you again. Yeah. And before we end the program, I want to emphasize, and thank you everyone for being here. I want to emphasize that even during a pandemic, enemies of Israel and the Jewish people still exist. This is something that you all know and you have all seen. And so you also know that ZOA's voice and work are crucial. We must ensure that we are strengthened and empowered, and that is where you all come in. Thank you to our current ZOA donors. Your financial contributions help make this possible, but we have further to go and we have more that must be achieved. I encourage all of you to donate to ZOA. I am so proud of this organization, but the reality of this pandemic is that the donations we're receiving are not there where they were at this time last year. So I'm hoping that we can count on you, and we will I know that we will come out at the other end of this stronger than our enemies. I know we will. But I want you to be a part of making that happen. Please support us financially as much as you can. Help us. We need you. And on that end, please consider joining ZOA's Donor Society. Being part of the Donor Society gives you access to exclusive briefings and opportunities with elected officials, Knesset members, members of the White House and ambassadors and others. But arguably the bigger benefit is how much more of an impact you have in expanding our crucial work on campuses, on Capitol Hill, in the courts, and in Israel. Membership to our Donor Society starts with a $1,000 donation or pledge for a calendar year, and it can be made in installments throughout the year. To learn more, please go to our website, ZOA.org, and click on the donate page, or you can email me at florida@zoa.org. And I will end by telling you about some of our amazing upcoming programs. This Wednesday, July 22nd at 12 p.m. is our ZOA Congressional Series, a conversation with Ted Cruz, featuring U.S. Senator Ted Cruz, with an introduction by ZOA National President Morton Klein. And I'm hoping that my colleague can put a link to that. And next Wednesday, July 29th at 1 p.m., ZOA Book Club Tikkun Olam, Israel vs. COVID-19. How is one of the planet's smallest countries helping to tackle the world's biggest challenge, featuring author Jody Cohen. And to register for that, please email lizburney@gmail.com. And then Wednesday, August 5th at 1 p.m., is another ZOA book club, Israel, The Will to Prevail, with featuring author and ambassador Danny Danone. And again, I'm hoping that my colleague can put a link to this event. And I'm going to thank you all again for being here. And then I'm going to actually, for those who need to go, please, don't let us hold you up. But I'm going to put a link to Edwin's show, which is every Thursday, back in the chat box, and leave it up for a moment longer for those who want to access it. And thank you so much again to everyone for being here.